Great. So thank you, everybody. And thank you, Zoe. And thank you, everybody, for being here. Welcome. We've just had a quick moment to run through the sort of opening welcoming slides. So for those of you who are joining us on video only, who are watching this after the event, this is the structure of how we're going to do the hour together today. Hence the start recording slide. So starting with Nikki and I, who we are and why do we bother? So if you can see in the manual, the why bother question is literally in chapter 1. It's for me the difference between a good idea and actually doing the thing. You know, why am I bothering to get curious about my feelings? Why am I bothering to then lean into the uncomfortable feelings and get curious about them rather than just avoiding them or disconnecting? And the example I used with Nikki earlier today is that because it means that I feel alive, you know, for me, this was the difference between living my life in like black and white TV and living my life in full color with smells and sounds and, you know, really feeling more present. And actually that sense of when I'm connected to my feelings and I know how to read them and respond to them, I'm actually present in my life. I'm actively engaging. I'm like in the driving seat of my life. And I've really learned to lean into embrace the sort of more challenging feelings, because I often find that that's where the juice stuff is. And when I am able to complete those feelings, they don't keep recurring. I don't keep tripping over old patterns over and over again. So I think for me, that kind of being able to get my feelings, understand them, complete them, and not hang out on that roundabout has been a really big factor for me, why I keep going. So Nikki, if you could unmute and just share with us who you are and why you bothering to do this.
I am Thor's co-author of the book. I've helped them bring it to life, really, and that's my gig. Words are my gig. I love words. I spent my life working with them, really. I've co-written 7 books. This was the 6th book that I've worked on, and all of them are around personal development or business coaching. And Thor asked me this question earlier, you know, why do I do first aid for feelings? And my answer was, well, I do feelings. I've always done feelings. It's what I do. And in doing this book with Thor, it brought a lot of learning home, learning which Thor has gathered from other places, learning that we all have in us innately. Um, there are so many reasons I do my first aid for feelings. The main one is, I mean, how can I beat Thor? Because it's, you know, like seeing things in full color as opposed to black and white. That's a very good description of what you get from doing your first aid for feelings. For me, I think it changes over time. Currently, first aid for feelings really helps me hold steady. And I think over life, as I continue to using it, that will be what I'll come back to. It helps me hold steady. I think innately, as we go through, even I think it's in the first 2 chapters, so you'll learn about feeling styles, whether you're a blocker or you're an engulfer. I used to be an engulfer. My habit is when I become really engulfed, I block. I recognize that now, and the tools and techniques that I've learned through writing this book and working with Thor really help me to hold steady and be real. And isn't that what we all want to do, to be real?
I think that's a really good way, actually. Yeah, just keeping it real. And we often say it, but actually there's a difference between saying it and really feeling it. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, I'm definitely, yeah. So thank you for that. Thank you for sharing that. And I think when we go into, when you go into breakout rooms later, this might be one of the things you want to, you know, sort of talk about. So then coming to some housekeeping, we have these sort of mostly 3 sections. So there's the kind of this part and the teaching part is the sort of first 20, 25 minutes. We will then have breakout rooms, so small groups for sort of 15 minutes or so. And then we'll have questions and answers. That's when we come all together back into the main space. You've had a better chance to talk and kind of get to know each other a bit and sort of prompt questions in yourself, or maybe share insights that you've got. So when we come to the Q&A at the end, we can get really specific. Again, coming back to what Nikki was saying about keeping it real. Your mics will be muted. If, like for in the Q&A, we will sort of ask you to unmute, just so that we can manage the soundscape here. There are people here with neurodiversity, so soundscape is really important. so the mics aren't activated without everybody knowing that it's about to happen. That's basically it. Please do ask questions in the chat as you come up. Don't keep them all to the end. Nikki will use her superpowers to track questions. So just ask them as they come to your mind, so you don't have to kind of hold them in your head and remember them. So no worries, she will care for that. So yeah, we're recording this part, and to hide the camera, we will send the link to all of you after. It'll be sent out latest Monday, but likely on Friday. What I forgot to put on the slide is that in the groups, breakout rooms, and in the Q&A at the end, which is why it's not recorded, I ask you to keep confidentiality. So what is shared in this space isn't taken out of this space. So I will make sure I add that to the slide for next week. And then for those of you who have done the add-on option of one-to-one support, you'll have the 2 20-minute, tune-ups during those 5 weeks, and also the email support. So if you've got that option, do bear that in mind, that you can do that between the sessions themselves. So I don't know if you've ever been to hospital. I was recently in hospital, so I really know all about ops. This is when the nurse comes around and takes your temperature and your pulse and your blood pressure. And it can be quite helpful to take your own readings. It's like your own observations. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to ask you to write down those answers and actually email them to me now, so I can read them while you're in the breakout rooms, and I can then have them in mind when we come to the Q&A at the end. So at this point, so if you could stop the recording to make space for that. Again. So welcome back. We're going to be doing the teaching part of today's book club session, which is the first of 5. So we'll start with how to do book club. And the first one is that this is not school. There is no test, and nobody's looking over your shoulder. There is no right or wrong way. And this, like I was saying earlier, this isn't community service. You've all voluntarily signed up for this, and you can do it in whatever way works for you. So this space is for you to get curious, just to get that kind of curiosity on going, oh, I wonder. Because often what we start is starting with being critical. We want to turn that around. And practice being kind to yourself. And for some of you, it might even just start being kind to yourself. For some of you, being kind to yourself might be quite radical and something that you are not very familiar with. So today is just gently starting that process. It's about thinking about your why bother. Like Nikki and I were saying, our why bothers. What might be a why bother for you? Why are you bothering to do this? You could be doing lots of other things on a Wednesday. Why are you bothering doing this? What is it that's sort of your reason? And we'll be talking about that a little bit later, but towards the end of the session, but kind of making that why bother visible. I often encourage people to use it as part of the password to log on to the computer or something like that. We're talking about that a bit more before we finish. And then over the next week, kind of identify pockets of time that work for you to read the manual and do some experiments. We're encouraging you to do experiments. And then, of course, like taking your cue from Frank's letter, and do your book club your way. Like I said, there really isn't a right way or a wrong way. And this is about you and your feelings and your experience. And that I can imagine for the first week, you'll be figuring stuff out. And by the time you get to the 5th week, you've got a much more of a rhythm and a sense of it. So being kind and gentle with yourself as you just get a sense of how it works best for you. So then starting just with what is first aid for feelings and what isn't it? Yeah. So first aid is very much in the name. It's first aid. It's like, it's a thing you bring in, if you've got a cut or a graze, or there's something in that moment to support. So it can help you make more helpful choices. You can learn a technique, the ABC technique for that. It can help bring down the intensity of an experience until you can put something more sustainable or more long-term in place. It can stop the habit of things getting worse and worse. When you're kind of digging a hole and you just keep digging? First aid can help you stop digging. Just put the shovel down because you understand what you're doing more. And then it can also help with that personal journey, can really help with recovery, or, alongside talking or physical therapy. But what it isn't is that it's not a cure. And it's not something you can just keep doing to reapply bandages or plasters. Sometimes actually, like I was working with somebody the other day, And we had to kind of stabilize them and then do some more intensive work. It's almost like stabilizing the patient before bringing them into surgery. So I think that kind of recognizing that first aid is only first aid. For that, it's brilliant, but it's not a long-term or even a medium-term sort of solution or response to a feeling, whether that's a symptom or sort of more of an experience. And as I'm talking now, I realize the sun has just come around this side of the building, and I'm here flooded with angelic sunlight, which is quite distracting, although it's lovely. So I'm just going to stand up and close the blinds. Just bear with me. Okay. So then let's start with the first big question. So why do you have feelings? You know, if there's so much bother, there's so much hassle, they're so uncomfortable, why do we have them in the first place? So the model I use and we use in the book, and I always use in my clinical work, is what's called the BPS model, or the biopsychosocial model. That model is biology is basically physical stuff, psychology is mental stuff, and social is like social context, is on the social side of things. And I particularly use the word feelings because it encompasses both emotions and sensations. So I don't know if you've sort of recognized that or logged that before. You know, I feel angry, I feel pain. You know, the feelings, it doesn't really matter the place of origin, if you like. And I would also argue that when you are in pain, you will have some emotions about this. And when you have emotions, there will be some physical resonance. There will be some tightness in the body or some joy in the body or whatever. The body will respond to whatever the emotion is. So it's really that integrated way of looking at an experience as thoughts and emotions and sensations. And we're not talking about in the book club because we've had to kind of cherry pick the key points for today. But in chapter 1, you have the feeling chart where you have the 6 components of state. And we look there at the interplay between thoughts, emotions, and sensations. But to bring 2 key examples that I always use for feelings, the first one is the second date. We may think we're really rational beings and we do everything by logic, or by rational logic, rather. But actually, I don't know about you, if you've ever been on a date with somebody that to all intents and purposes should be perfect for you. Let's say your friends have set you up on a blind date and they're like, yes, they tick all the right boxes. You go on the date and they're a lovely human being, but there is no vibe. There is no vava room going on. Do you decide to go on a second date? It's likely that you don't, regardless of how many tick boxes they have on paper. If you don't have that little spark of magic, you're not going to do that. So I think we often underestimate just how powerful feelings are to big decisions and choices, like, you know, potential life partner. And then the other one I often use is deciding on a new place to live. So whether you're buying or renting, if you go into a property that, you know, ticks all the boxes, you go in and it's just, nah, you're not feeling it. And then the estate agent gives you this wild card property that doesn't fit any of the boxes. And then you go in and you go, wow, I love this place. And sure, it doesn't have a garage and it doesn't have a bath and it doesn't have like a roof, but I love it. I'm going to live here. And I think these 2 are really good examples of when it just goes straight to our feelings. And it's the feelings that are actually the sort of deciding vote on something in ways that, but I know not everybody here is British, but particularly for the Brits, they often have this belief that they are very rational beings. And as a foreigner that's lived here since the last century, I'm like, no. Not really. So it can be really interesting just to recognize how much feelings play a part, as they should, in our lives, because feelings let us know what we want more of and what we want less of. So Nikki referred earlier to the kind of feeling style, which is a kind of spectrum in the book. And so on one end is the blocker, and on the other end, it's the engulfer. So in the book, you will see that we all seem, you know, kind of move along that spectrum, even depending on the situation or depending on the feeling. Like we block anger, but we feel anxiety, you know. But you're likely to have sort of habit energy, or you tend to be on one side rather than the other. And it's not about right or wrong. It's just to recognize, I tend to be engulfed by my feelings, or I tend to just avoid all my feelings and block them. So just getting us curious about what is your feeling style. And the reason why this can be helpful is it gives you somewhere to start. And it's like a bit like when I realized that I was kind of living in black and white. I remember I was on an airplane flying back from somewhere back to Iceland, and I just had this insight going like, I'm feeling my feelings. Wow, everything is so vibrant. It's like I suddenly got, color vision. And it was a powerful experience to recognize how black and white my life had been before then, because I had unplugged for lots of good reasons, but I had unplugged all my feelings in a way that I could sort of consciously be aware of them. Then the thing I want to just mention is it's on page 34 in the book, in the manual, is the triangle of time, task, and resources. So we often feel overwhelmed. Overwhelm is one of the key feelings that I work with people in consultations and on Insight Timer, where I have a free recording called The Gift of Overwhelm. It is the most played recording out of all of recordings. And I think, so you were telling me this morning, there are about 30,000 plays. We're coming up to about 30,000 plays of the various recordings on Insight Timer. And I think Gift of Overwhelm has like 5,000 plays. I mean, it's like the most popular, or one of the most popular, because we just feel it so much. And I want to say here in terms of, and there's a note in the manual, we can also be overwhelmed by our feelings. So not just resources and tasks, but we can feel overwhelmed by our feelings. But the same principle applies in terms of that pacing. So the invitation is to get curious about, like, particularly if you often get engulfed, is that overwhelm of feeling, and then getting a sense of actually, can I give some time to that? Can I give some resources to that? What would be the task? What would be the activity? So you can, between now and next week, we'll invite you to read the introduction in the first 2 chapters. And as you learn a bit more about that in the manual, hopefully you can get a sense of how you can start to apply that to your actual experience. So this is mainly kind of chapter 1 stuff. And then if we move on to chapter 2 stuff, so the chapter 1 is like, what are feelings? Why do we bother even having them? The second one is more about, what are you doing now? And that's, what if you didn't have feelings? Wouldn't that be marvelous? And the example we use in the manual is about this young girl who can't feel pain. There's a condition where your neurotransmitters for pain aren't working. And just to recognize that not being able to experience pain at all, which for some people is like this fantasy, carries with it some serious consequences. Because if we can't feel pain, our life is at risk. Pain is a really important feeling that we need to survive. So really recognize that, our hunger or joy or pleasure, if we didn't feel pleasure, guess what? We probably wouldn't reproduce. So the species will be over. That's it, done, extinct. Or, wouldn't thrive in terms of eating good food. So really recognizing, if we didn't have feelings, it'd be a pretty limited lifespan, if any at all. But what we want to get curious about is like what you're doing now. How aware are you? Are there specific people that you struggle with being around? What lets you know that you're struggling? Because for many people, we don't realize we're struggling until we are struggling so badly, we're practically shut down. So it's that kind of, oh, apologies for the wrong location of that apostrophe there. What lets you know that you're struggling? So for some people, it's when they realize they're hungover because they drank too much last night. Yeah. For some people, it's like when they realize they've worked 80 hours that week. It's like, hang on a minute, there's something not right there. And the invitation here is to see your feelings. And chapter 2 is very much about that, seeing feelings as language. Talking about literacy. We talk about health literacy, emotional literacy. And that kind of comes under depending on how you kind of do it, but I like to think of it as parts of self-care literacy. And we know literacy in terms of reading and writing, as in words, but literacy also applies to being able to read and respond to your feelings, being able to read and respond to symptoms like, I don't know, if you have a UTI, if you have a headache, or, what is it going on? Do I need to go and see a doctor or not? And literally, like on LinkedIn, I think this morning or yesterday, I was reposting something from the International Self-Care Foundation about the European Parliament talking about the importance of self-care in Parliament, because we're recognizing more and more just how vital it is that we know how to read this stuff. We know how to read symptoms, we know how to read feelings, and then know what to do about it, what action we can take from there. So on the next page, we have the specific, just because that graphic is quite small, we have the 9 different questions. And for example, when you go into the breakout room later, you can think about and talk about some of those questions, and Zoe will post them as a message in so you can see them when you're in the breakout room. But yeah, that can be an interesting thing when you're, you will be in a group of, 3 or 4 people to go, actually, I struggle in this situation, or when I struggle, I do this. Some people go into rescuing other people. It's much easier to rescue other people than myself. Great, I'll just do that. Or I'll go to the gym a lot, or I'll just eat a lot, or I'll just watch a lot of TV, I'll just blank. So there is that kind of sense of those questions are prompts to help you identify and create a profile. So this is actually a thing that we talk about, which is a feeling profile, it's an actual tool that we have in the manual. So we've now come to the end of the teaching. I'm going to ask Zoe to stop the recording, and then we'll talk about the breakout.